Essex, 1986. Neon lights, designer clothes, nightclubs packed with shoulder pads, champagne show-offs, and lads who spend all week grafting and all weekend proving a point. On the edge of Romford, standing proud on South Street, was the Hollywood Nightclub, a place that, arguably, had the hardest door team anywhere south of the Thames. Not big blokes, not tough lads, we're talking monsters, the type of doormen you only saw in that era. Bodies built like brick kilns, hair slicked, penguin suits stretched tight across shoulders that didn't fit through normal door frames. Some were known fighters, with reputations. A few would go on to feature in far darker stories as the Essex underworld evolved into the 90s. A door team so feared, even seasoned villains thought twice before causing trouble. But one night, a group of young West Ham lads, the emerging generation of the ICF, walked straight through those doors. Not the older faces, not the legends, the youngsters, full of swagger, full of noise, and completely unaware they were stepping into the territory of men who dealt with violence for a living. Inside, a spark turned into a blaze, 30 ICF lads versus a handful of doormen. A fight so fierce, so quick, and so brutally one-sided, it became folklore. This is the story of the night the intercity youngsters took on the Hollywood Door team. Now, we're not talking the big hitters like Cass Pennant in his prime, or the older Canning Town faces here. According to the accounts we've got, these were younger lads, the type who, back then, wore the Pringle, the Fila, the Lacoste, and carried themselves like they were 10 feet tall. And on this particular night, around 1986, from what the doormen remember, about 30 of them descended on Romford. Not for football, just a night out, except nights out in the 80s had a funny way of turning into something else. The Hollywood wasn't some tiny backstreet dive. It was purpose-built, styled by an Italian designer, complete with mirrored walls and a revolving dance floor that apparently left half the female clientele walking like they just stepped off a ferry to Calais. Smart place, huge, and with a VIP area that regularly attracted East End faces, celebrities, and the sort of men whose wallets were thicker than their patience. But what the ICF lads didn't know was this: the Hollywood Door team didn't lose fights. Led by Mick Kelly, an Irishman built like a quarry wall, they were famous for one thing. If trouble kicked off inside the club, they didn't walk, they charged. Straight through the crowd, straight to the source, and straight out the fire doors, by force if needed. And on this night, force was definitely needed. The ICF slipped in quietly at first, in 2s and 3s, avoiding the door team's radar. But inside, they grouped up next to the DJ booth, and if you know anything about firm mentality in that era, you know what happens next. The stance changes, the chests come out, the atmosphere shifts. They weren't there to wreck the place, but they wanted people to notice them, and people did. The DJ spotted it first. Back then he had a panic button under the decks, 2 taps meant urgent. That night he hit it twice, hard. From the front door, Mick Kelly heard the alarm, gathered his boys and marched towards the dance floor. What he walked into was chaos, a huge scrap, bodies everywhere, punches flying in every direction. At first he couldn't tell who was attacking who, just a mass of designer clobber, limbs and shouting. He needed to get every last one of them out the fire doors, now, and that's where the real story begins. Because when Mick and his team forced the mob outside into the cold Romford night, they realized the smaller group wasn't just a random bunch of lads, it was their own doorman, including Big Lee Chapman, a man as wide as a wardrobe, lads hanging off him. And once the doormen knew who the enemy was, they didn't break up the fight. They joined in, full throttle. The ICF thought they had the upper hand. They were young, fit, full of bravado, lads who'd had their fair share of street fights around East London, Stratford, Barking. They were used to winning, but within seconds everything changed. The Hollywood Door team had built their reputation on one thing: loyalty. You hit one of them, you hit all of them. These weren't part-time bouncers doing a Friday shift for beer money. These were old-school hard men. So when they saw Big Lee Chapman, a man with hands like coal shovels, fighting off 3 lads at once, they steamed in. And if the youngsters thought they were in a scrap before, this was a different league. The fight was savage, the kind you only saw in the 70s and 80s when the doors were staffed by men who lived on a diet of protein, cigarettes, and chaos. One doorman grabbed a lad by the jacket and literally lifted him off the ground before slamming him back down. Mick Kelly waded through bodies like they were nothing but smoke. And Lee Chapman, he was tossing people aside like they were cardboard cutouts. Every punch he threw sounded like a cupboard door slamming shut. Within minutes, the tide had completely turned. The ICF boys, young, game, but out of their depth, were suddenly on the wrong side of a beating. Prone bodies littered the pavement, designer jumpers torn, noses broken, egos rearranged. but the strangest moment of the night came after the dust started to settle. According to Mick Kelly's own recollection, one young lad, bloodied, dazed, barely on his feet, staggered over and handed him a business card. "Congratulations, you've just met the ICF." Mick couldn't suppress his laughter. By the time the last punch landed and the final lad dragged himself off the pavement, the cold Romford night felt strangely still. Not quiet, not with 30 battered young men catching their breath and 6 doormen pacing like caged animals, but still in that way a battlefield feels once the adrenaline drains out. Then came the sirens. And here's the thing about police in the 80s, they always arrived late and they always arrived angry. 3 ambulances pulled up first, weaving between the bodies on the ground. The Hollywood crew stood stoically, still in their bow ties and sweat-soaked shirts, still in that "don't even think about it" stance. The youngster swagger was gone now, replaced by dazed blinking, shaking hands, and the quiet, stunned acceptance that they'd bitten off more than they could chew. The police eventually rocked up and decided someone had to be blamed. According to Mick's account, the officers initially wanted to arrest the entire door team, every last one of them. And frankly, in any other club, that's exactly what would have happened. But Hollywood wasn't a normal venue. It was one of the busiest, most profitable nightclubs in Essex, and the owners weren't about to let the police strip the door bare on a packed night. The club owners argued, "You take all our doormen, this place will erupt again before midnight." And they were right. Without those men on the door, you weren't running a nightclub, you were running a street party waiting to turn into a riot. Eventually, a compromise was reached. 3 doormen, including Mick, were taken in for questioning. A handful of the ICF lads were also arrested. Not for long though, because here's the twist that tells you everything about the era. Nobody pressed charges. It wasn't how things were done back then. If you lost, you licked your wounds. If you won, you didn't brag to the law. And if you were still standing by morning, you went home and kept your mouth shut. A doctor patched up the worst of the injuries. The doormen gave their statements, short, vague, polite. The West Ham lads refused to name names, and within a few hours, everyone walked out of the station through different doors, heading back to their worlds with the sort of bruises that didn't need retelling. There was no vendetta, no follow-up, no retaliation. Yeah, it was messy, but it also became one of those strangely funny stories too. Ask anyone from Essex about that night and they'll eventually mention the business card. It's almost poetic, isn't it? A calling card meant to intimidate, handed over while the lad giving it could barely stand up straight. Even Mick Kelly, a man who'd seen more violence than most people see in a lifetime, laughed about it years later. He admitted he respected the commitment. "If that kid wasn't concussed," he said in an interview, "I'd have thought he was taking the piss." And that's part of the legacy, because beneath the violence and bravado, the Hollywood fight became a sort of morality tale, a reminder that, no matter how big your reputation is, there's always someone out there who hasn't heard it, or simply doesn't care. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. You know it makes sense. And if you enjoy the old school stories, take advantage of the offer in the description. I've listed a few books you can get for free with the Amazon free trial, well worth signing up, and you'll be doing me a massive favor. I'll see you next time.